Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is MTA International USA Studios in Silver Spring, Maryland. My name is Ahmad Khan and I will be moderating today's discussion on Islam Ahmadiyya in America. Our esteemed panelists today are Brother Al-Haj, Habeeb Shafeeq of Orlando, and Brother Al-Haj, Yaqub of Milwaukee. Brother Al-Haj Habeeb served in the education industry as social services professional, social services consultant. He acquired his master's in public administration. He worked in city government planning, special projects planning. He's a world traveler. His passion is community service and education, and in his off time, he loves to cook and garden. And Brother Al-Haj Yaqub served in the military during the Vietnam era. He also served as an executive management in proprietary schools, worked in the nonprofit for 10 years, quality control in the American Society of Mechanical Engineers as a code inspector. He's a writer, he's a thinker, and he's a scholar. In the last episode, we examined the decade of the 1960s and the progress of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and what kind of hurdles it had. And in retrospect, we reached to a conclusion that the quality of our message was not altered at all. And it was further progressing in the same constancy that it began with the arrival of Mufti Muhammad Sadiq. So with that propensity, I would like to continue that discussion and examine the decade of the 1970s. And the first question that kind of comes to mind, Brother Yaqub, is that, and it was an interesting event because it kind of shows you the perspective of the feelings and the love that the members of the community had for the Khalifa. A contingent of American Ahmadi Muslims traveled abroad to visit the third Khalifa, may Allah have mercy on him, as Mirza Nasir Ahmed, to go and see and visit him in Rabwa, and they also visited Qadian. This was around 1976, 1977 period, and Brother Yaqub, you were also part of this contingent.
Right.
Can you just kind of give your perspective of the motivation behind this visit?
The motivation was to make a connection, a living connection with the Caliph of the time. That's what it was. It allowed us to be able to have a higher degree of certainty about the Khalifa and what Caliphate was. We were able to, in going to Qadian, see the places that we read about in the books, like the room where the red drops were, to see where...
all of the things you read, you wanted to experience that?
We knew it was a higher degree of certainty. It's just not something you read, but you actually went there and visited, and you were able to comprehend what was going on to that degree. Now, going to Qadian was one flavor. Going to Rabwa was another flavor. And that flavor in Rabwa was Caliphate. We were able to see the power or the magnitude of Caliphate take place there. We had an opportunity to really receive Hazur. Every evening he would come by and visit us and spend time with us. And he would talk about many things. So it was
how did you feel when you first physically saw Hazrat Khalifatul Masih III?
Humble.
Humble. Extremely.
Very humbled.
It can't be described in words.
No, not really.
No, many of us started to weep. We started weeping. We started weeping.
Right. And for us, he was like a father figure, and his assalamu alaikum was something that would just melt you down. So,
what was his voice like, for instance?
Soft, melodic.
Yeah.
And he had this magnificent, beautiful white beard.
Right. The way he would come in, and he was very perceptive.
Yes.
We had one brother who had a keychain. And on the keychain, there were just keys all the way down. And I remember Hazur walking into the room, and he looked at the brother's keychain. and he picked it up and looked at it, and he did like this. Now, no one would ever surmise that a keychain could be a weapon, but the Khalifa right away. And many times he could shake hands with someone, and he could say, "Oh, you're in the martial arts." Very perceptive. So we were able to witness just a level of human being.
And his wits and his...
Yeah, he was just really magnanimous.
Out of the blue, we were sitting there, and out of the blue, he changed his voice and he said, Khalifa Salis, that is, "A roast of human flesh may not be consumed." And we were looking, and we didn't know what was going on. Then he said it again, "A roast of human flesh may not be consumed." And he said, "Oh man," speaking to Brother Muhammad, you're setting too close to the fire."
Yeah.
And it was just...
So it showed his personal interaction,
yes,
which was down to earth.
His wit, his perceptibility. Yeah. He gave us this marvelous antidote about probability and existence of God, and it was just incredible. He said, if you put pieces of paper 1 through 10, and you shake it up, and you put your hand in it, what's the probability? We didn't know. He said 1 out of 10. And then he said, if you a second time, and you get 2, and a third time, and then exponentially, you do this 10 times, and you get 10 out of 10, what is the probability of that? Well, of course we didn't know. He said, hold that thought. If the earth moves 1 inch closer to the sun, we would bake to death. If the earth was 1 inch further, we would freeze to death. What is the probability, American brothers, of the earth being at the right place at the right time if there's no Allah? Assalamu alaikum, I'll see you for lunch.
So even in his everyday conversation, he was teaching you things.
Yes, about probability. And he gave this magnificent thing, and then he would just leave, and I would see you. And he said, I'm sorry, Haji, but yeah. He said, a time is coming, chaps, that you'll be looking at your Khalifa like this. I come and I see you, I've spoiled you, chaps, right. 3-4 times a day.
Right. Elucidating to the fact that there will be many who come.
When the victory of Islam and you see people entering in troops, right. He said to us, a time is coming that you won't have 4 or 5 malikats with your Khalifa at a jalsa.
We can kind of even imagine something like this. Well, I was looking at the jalsa in Ghana.
Yes.
And they had 25 to 30,000 people. Right. And I could only imagine that they were probably doing something like this.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
When they were looking at the Khalifa. Yes. So it's not too far from that future now.
Here in the U.S., when the 5th Khalifa first came, our center sent out a thing that says, look, if you've seen Hazur in the last 1 or 2 years, don't ask for a malikat. Right. We've got the demand is too much.
There was I want to tell you the story about Hazur would, as African Americans, we were coming over there, and for many of us, we never had that type of attention from any dignitary before. And Muhammad Sadiq asked Hazur once, why do you spend so much time with us? Why do you come and see us? And Hazur lowered his head for a second, and he raised up and he said, every Khalifa has to have a Bilal. Now, for many of us, that went all the way over our heads. It took a long time to catch up, maybe years to really understand exactly what he was saying. For many of us, we began to study Hazrat Bilal Raziyallahu Anhu, may Allah bless his soul, and understood the position that Bilal had to the Holy Prophet of Islam. And we could see that this should be the role of the African American, inshallah.
Absolutely.
Since, Brother Yaqub, you also visited, and I just want to kind of end with this, you also visited Qadian in this trip. What was it like to visit the grave of the promised Messiah?
Quiet. It was after prayers in the morning. We would go and get chai, and then we would all walk to the Bahishti Maqbara.
Or the Evelyn Garden that we...
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so we spent quiet contemplation time.
Absolutely.
there, and we would take photos there. We have several photos, but it was a quiet time, a period of reflection and prayer.
At that time, you could go right up and stand next to the grave of Promised Messiah, Khalifa Nuruddin, and I have photos just standing next to that. Now, of course, it's been encased, and
it seemed like a very highly spiritual experience, a very wonderful experience to see the Khalifa of the time in person, to see what he was like, and then just melt with him.
Absolutely. And to have him to extend love to you,
love
that
and
just
devotion
was absolutely
and I think
extraordinary.
With that the quote about the Bilal, I think that I had a little love behind that too. So
absolutely.
I'm sure because of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be and blessings upon him, I had that love for Bilal. Allah be pleased with him. I want to get to something on a similar sentiment.
Okay.
Now, the third Khalifa, may Allah have mercy on him, in 1976 made his first ever visit to the United States.
Yes.
And Brother Habeeb, and I'll read you one reflection of our late and respected elder, Brother Muzaffar, his reflection on seeing the Khalifa of the time on U.S. soil. And let me get that reflection from him. He said, Hazur's arrival in America was the greatest event in the history of our movement. Seeing Hazur entering the lobby at Dulles Airport was the epitome of blessings for us Ahmadis in America. And he talks about this other person who was not a Ahmadi Muslim. Mr. Benny Williams, one of our non-Muslim guests, stated to another Muslim that if we do not follow this man, we were fools. So it seems like a very powerful message just on its own. And can you give us some reflections on that for yourself?
Yes, and I need to apologize to the audience. This was, I was a young man, and it was my first direct duty with Caliphate. I was in Dayton, Ohio. Jimmy Carter had just been elected. He had just left Dayton, Ohio. And it was my duty to secure the presidential suite for our beloved Khalifa, who was coming to visit us. And I was standing on the top floor of the Biltmore Hotel. I didn't care how long it was there. I just knew that nobody was going to get in this room. And I stood on this post, and he came. And when he came down the hallway, I stood at attention, and I asked him respectfully to pause. I wanted to go in and check the room again. I came out, and he said, I can go in now, sir? I said, yes, Hazur. And he went in, and it was the highlight of my life. And that whole trip in 1976 that he visited, he talked about the pending world doom, and America, it was going over our heads because it was 1976, it was the bicentennial, it was our 200th birthday. Nobody was in doom and gloom. Jimmy Carter was just elected President of the United States.
And it's interesting you said that because in 1976, the third Khalifa, may Allah have mercy on him, said in his address at the time about an impending doom and destruction of World War III, which our fifth Khalifa of the time is, may Allah be his helper, is saying the same thing right now.
Same thing.
And in this message was published in the Muslim Sunrise in 1974. And then a very strange coincidental fact, in 1975, the United States military budget went up. And few years before, the Khalifa had already told us that something like this is coming up. So it's amazing that how he foresaw something like this. What was he trying to say to the world?
That we needed, if we did not give ourselves a moral and spiritual pause, that we were head speeding long head at warp speed towards destruction. And thus his message, because they were, why are you coming here? What is your message here? And he said, love for all, hatred for none.
And it goes back to the message of peace and promotion that the second Khalifa had given way back in 1932, before World War II.
Yes.
And at that time, Chaudhry Zafrullah Khan had read out loud that message, the same message. So again, going back to the premise of this whole discussion, that our message, the constancy of message has not altered.
Right.
And the one unifying factor is Khilafat.
Exactly.
And that is a theme that will be running in these discussions, and even more headstrong in the next few episodes. So I want to ask a very specific question about something that the third Khalifa said, Brother Yaqub, and that he said directly, he was very direct on this, he said make deep and personal relations with Khilafat and cooperate fully with his representatives. What was he trying to say to us?
Well,
and this was at the 24th annual Ahmadiyya annual convention.
Right. The pecking order was the Khalifa, his officers, and the missionaries. And I think that there was, once we began to make these trips to Pakistan, there was a tendency to want to go around either the missionaries or go around the elected officials within the Jamaat and write letters directly to Hazur and ask him to answer administrative questions going on locally or nationally in the United States. And Hazur began to explain to us the Nizam of Jamaat Ahmadiyya. And that was very important to establish that in front of everyone. So that's what he did.
Brother Habeeb,
Yes.
can you kind of explain the kind of efforts that were behind the community, because there was so much media coverage that was done just to kind of set the stage of what I'm talking about. The Journal Herald, Daily News, Dayton News, Washington Post, the New York Post, all of these were covering the arrival of the Khalifa. What was that effort, and how did it come about?
That was a local effort done by some extraordinary missionaries, Mir Muhammad Ibrahim, along with another team.
And you were also
national team.
part of the team.
Yeah,
if I
yes,
understand
but
correctly.
it was these missionaries who were actually writing these particular letters. We would get the contacts, they were writing letters, and we didn't have a full-fledged media or PR team. We had not involved to that particular point. But once one news media organization carried a story, it would hit the AP wire or something, and they would see and hear this message, and then they would want to pick it up. Plus, Allah Ta'ala was working in the Hazur's behalf, just paving the way at this time, all the way to...
It kind of mimics the environment in some of our modern times of the media coverage. Sometimes that picks up whenever Hazur goes to a place. The coverage of media just it looks like that it's following him.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
As an attraction.
Yes.
Right.
An attractive force.
Where Allah Ta'ala says about the Holy Prophet, it's not you who threw, it's we.
It
was the we that was with Hazur.
I wanted to underline something that Habeeb touched on, and that was the work of Mian Ibrahim. Mian Ibrahim set a tone for us, for those who were around him, to start writing, and writing. And he challenged us to write. And he would take our papers and correct them. He thought, not only writing, but he thought that we were not speaking English properly. So in order to be in his company, he was an English teacher. He honed us. I mean, not that I'm the the best English speaker that there is, but taking into consideration the task that we had to do, he honed us to start writing and to make your English an English that people can understand. So I think that that's important.
And many of our sisters at that time were responsible also for contacting news media people. I remember our brother Hassan Hakim, he had various news organizational contacts because he was a journalist. One of our brothers, Brother Munir Ahmad's son out in St. Louis, he was a journalist. So we were scattered, but again, Allah took those meager resources.
I think the background of that perfection, it wasn't to knit and pick, but it was to make the message more effective the way that it needs to be.
Better.
Oh, yeah.
Because the message is above everything else.
Exactly.
No, this was not knit and pick. This was to make it better.
And I want to go to a very specific person now. Okay. And in historical perspective, he's not just a historical person in our community, but he is a historical person in the general worldwide community, Dr. Abdul Salam.
Oh my goodness.
A world-renowned theoretical physicist, late Dr. Abdul Salam, he passed away. He had won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1979. Interesting fact, he came to United States in 1971 to acquire information about the Manhattan Project because he was in the process of building the nuclear program for Pakistan. So he had already made a visit. And one more visit before that was actually to create the space program for Pakistan called, initially to create the space program for Pakistan called Suparco.
Yes.
So can you kind of, Brother, can you kind of give a personal reflection on this man, and then also just a sentiment of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, what they were feeling when he did win the Nobel Prize as being a member of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community?
I think everybody knows and appreciates that aspect about the Nobel Prize. I'd like to offer a personal one with the connection with Mir Muhammad Ibrahim, who was a missionary at the time. I was a young student. I happened to be at the mosque, and me and Muhammad, we affectionately called him Imam Saab, Imam Ibrahim. He said, Habeeb, I need you to go to Columbus and pick up one of our very prominent individuals. And I asked him who it was, and he told me that this was a man named Abdul Salam, and where he said, I think he's going to be here. He's going to be at Ohio State. That was 71 miles away. I did not have the best possible car, and he said, you need to go and fetch him and bring him back here and let him know that there's a group of people here to see him. Well, Lebec, I hear and obey. I jumped into this raggedy car. It was cold, and made my way 71, 72 miles to Columbus. I found my way, and again, Allah Ta'ala, there was no GPS. I found my way to this huge university, where Ohio State is a city within itself. And I found where they were giving a reception for Dr. Abdul Salam. I came up to him and I handed him a note, and he looked at the note, and I said, sir, you're supposed to go with me. And he was drinking a Coke. He put his Coke down, and he said, where are you parked? I tried to describe it to him. He said, I need to go get my coat. Dr. Abdul Salam left a huge reception at Ohio State, got in the raggediest car in Ohio with me. We drove back, and we got to the masjid, and maybe there were at best 15 or 20 of us in a basement. He gave us an astounding lecture, and I took him back.
Hey.
My point is, an imam, the Jamaat said, come. He dropped his worldly renown, reception, came with this humble person back, spoke to 15 or 20 of us, And I'll never forget that.
Exemplifies his obedience and love for Khilafat as well, which is the common theme that we're running with. And I just want to get to the last point. Was a unfortunate incident that happened in Pakistan in 1974, Brother Yaqub, and that was that the Ahmadiyya Muslim community was designated as non-Muslims. So it created a cause and effect where a lot of the brothers had to travel abroad or immigrate from Pakistan. So if any of you can kind of experience in sentiments or tell some personal anecdotes to what kind of situation that was from the perspective as a Ahmadi Muslim in the U.S.
Well, I would say that this being declared a non-Muslim affected the way in which that I viewed performing the rites of Hajj. And that is that Ahmadis were considered to be non-Muslim, and they were not permitted to perform the rites of Hajj. If you were an Ahmadi, you couldn't. That was the official party line of the Saudi Arabian government or whatever. However, Allah says in the Quran that He gives permission to whoever He wills. It is through Allah's permission that they perform the rites of Hajj. So a man can make the declaration that you are a non-Muslim, a non-whatever. It doesn't make any difference with Allah. He's the one who makes those decisions.
It seems like Allah Ta'ala, even though that situation or those people or that government, whatever the case was trying to suppress the message of Islam and Ahmadiyya, it actually proliferated much more in the West.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Right.
And the United States became that very shining example of the prophecy of Prophet Muhammad, which was the sun shall rise in the West.
Right.
I happen to, I'm sorry.
The propagation of Islam and Ahmadiyya, it actually took a leap forward.
It
Leap
did.
forward.
It did.
In the United States and elsewhere in the world, I would imagine, and just after they had made the declaration that we were not Muslims. So, and from an American perspective, the mind, how can a government declare you to be a non-anything?
Yeah, it's a vast subject, and I wish there was another show that we can cover this entire piece.
Yes.
And give it its own perspective.
Yes.
But the main point from that is that Allah Ta'ala has always come to the aid of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community
Yes.
when others are trying to suppress the message. Even in the United States, we've discussed this in previous conversations. Whenever something like that happens, we are given the divine help to go to the path of.
And as African Americans, we stood tall and proud. We didn't. It did not affect us one bit.
And then goes back to the quality of the message of the community, that it has never been altered, and our resilience to keep continuing following the guidance of the Khilafat of the time. So you can find all of this information at alislam.org/sunrise, or you can go to www.muslimsunrise.com. Thank you for joining us. This is MTA International USA Studio, Silver Spring, Maryland, on Islam Ahmadiyya in America. Jazakallah, assalamu alaikum.
Jeez.